Greetings. Welcome to Say So, where we talk about it, whatever it is, because what you do not know can hurt you or someone that you know and love. So let's get to the root. For today's episode, we are going to talk about trauma triggers. And I'm going to share, of course, personal testimony and stories of survival, real life examples. We're going to go into scripture about what the word says about it. And we're also going to explore the natural in addition to the spiritual. Terminology, terms, and different ways, different common triggers, different ways to cope, etc. So we're going to get right into it without further ado. So when you think about the topic of trauma triggers, those are two words, right? So we're going to define them first and foremost. The term trauma is defined as a deeply distressing and or disturbing experience. Now, the example that they gave underneath the definition was a personal trauma like the death of a child. Has anyone listening experienced the death of a child or know of someone that has experienced the death of a child? That is certainly a trauma that comes along with its own individual set of triggers. Now, triggers. What does it mean to be triggered? What is a trigger? And when I think about a trigger, I think about a gun. I think about, how once you pull the trigger, there is an immediate reaction to that. So that is a natural example of a trigger. But what does it mean? To be triggered says of a response caused by a particular action, process, or situation. So basically, when something happens, you react, or like the one of the, I think it's Newton's law that says for every action there is a reaction. All right, so we can be triggered in many different ways. And as I'm going through this, I want you to attempt to find yourself in this or someone that you know and love. Have you experienced this yourself? Have you seen someone go through it or whatever or what have you? So we can be triggered by our senses, right? And we have 5 of them, but specifically 4 come to mind at the top of the list of what we can be triggered by. One is what we see with our eyes. We can also be triggered by what we smell with our nose. We can be triggered by what we hear with our ears. We can also be triggered by what we feel, and that's our natural sense of touch, what we feel. And that can be emotions as well as what you touch or sense with your fingers or your hands or your body or skin, your external. By places, specific places or locations. Emotions. You can experience a emotion as a child or at an earlier time in your life, and then you re-experience that, and it could almost take you back to where you first experienced it or where you experienced it with a certain level of intensity. Now, the last 2 things are we could be triggered by events or dates. So if something happened, let's say on Valentine's Day, let's say you may have been sexually assaulted or something. So every year Valentine's Day comes, and it could have been, by someone who was supposed to be a date. It could have been a blind date. It could have been someone, an acquaintance, someone that you were dating for a while or whatever, or what have you. Or it could have been a complete, total stranger. But just that time of the year approaching can be triggering to you. Let's say, when you go to Walmart or all the big stores, they have all the heart balloons, they have teddy bears, they have chocolate. Everything says Valentine's Day, XOXO, and all of those things. So just as that time is approaching, those decorations and things being out, or just anything that symbolizes Valentine's Day could be a trigger for someone that has experienced a trauma specifically on or around Valentine's Day. And also, when they talk about dates, it could be the anniversary of something that happened to you, the anniversary of when someone passed away, or you attended a funeral, or maybe you saw a crime, or maybe you saw a body, or know that there was a body outside or somewhere in your vicinity or what have you. And I had that experience years ago. I was living in an apartment building, and I didn't know that there was a body out there. But when the police knocked on my door and asked me had I heard or seen anything, I began to speak with neighbors like the next day or what have you, and found out that somebody was literally in my apartment building. There was only, let's see, there was only four apartments pretty much stacked on top of each other. It was only a two-story apartment. I lived on the second story. And no, actually, excuse me, it was a three-story apartment. I lived on the the third floor or the third story. I like the number three is my favorite, so I was on the third floor. And it was apartment three something, so I was on the third floor. And so there's like six people in our building. So first, second, third, built up on each side, or what have you. And the gentleman that was on the lower level on the left-hand side, I was actually on the right-hand side of the apartment building. The first floor, he was actually shot in the what do you call it, in the parking lot, and he lay there. And actually the neighbor that was literally across from me, so she was on the third floor on the left hand side, I was on the third floor on the right hand side. They heard or saw or both, and she went over and put a towel over his face because it was a body lying out in the parking lot. I have no earthly idea how or why I slept through the entire thing, but I did. The police knocking on my door was what woke me up. So I didn't hear the shots. I didn't hear anybody speeding off. I didn't hear any argument. I didn't hear anything that happened before, during, or after that incident. And it was literally in the parking lot. And what I will tell you is that I noticed soon after that, her and her family moved. And that was likely because seeing that spot where they saw that man deceased is a trigger. Like to look out your window and see, what you saw. You know what I'm saying? Your mind takes a mental picture of that. And to look out that same window, although he's not laying there anymore, but in your mind, it just flashes back a picture of what happened, especially if she put a towel over his face. So that means that she saw whatever expression was on his face. She saw the way that his body was laying. His eyes, whether his eyes were open or closed, whether there was blood. Like she, got a very visual memory to take with her or what have you. But like I said, they moved not long after that, and I'm assuming that probably had something to do with it because of what had happened there in that apartment parking lot. So, just a real life example. Did you know that there are actually, 3,400 emotions? And I thought that was wow. I thought that was a major number for there to be emotions. And I also wanted to define what emotions are, because the other things, touch, smell, feel, all of those things are pretty self-explanatory. And when you think about feelings versus emotions, there's a difference. So I wanted to differentiate. So an emotion is literally a natural, instinctive state of mind deriving from one's circumstance, mood, or relationship with others. So it's kind of a spinoff. Something happened between relationships or your mood or your circumstance that was going on at that time, and it's instinctive. That means it's almost automatic. It just happened, your state of mind. It just comes up, that emotion just surfaces or what have you. Now, we're going to talk about some of the external things as it pertains to trauma and trauma triggers. So we can be triggered by specific people. We can be triggered by a certain body type. We can be triggered by personality characteristics. So someone that has a certain type of personality, for example, if they have a very dominant or domineering personality, and maybe you had a negative or adverse experience with someone that was dominating or domineering or what have you, then that could be a trigger for you. As a body type, same thing. It could be like you were a child or you were a certain age and this person was shaped a certain way. It could be, a nice shape, or it could be something like they're overweight or what have you. But that could also feed into intimidation and just fear and things of that nature. If you're a child or you're smaller than that person, that almost puts you in the mind of bullying, somebody towering over you or yelling at you or being upset with you or whooping you or hitting you or what have you. Then that body type you might automatically get scared. Let's say 10, 12 years down the line, you have a boss that's shaped like them. and that boss is in an authoritative role in your life, and let's say one day they raise their voice or something like that, that could be a trigger for you. Now, specific people is literally that specific person that did something to you, or that you saw them do something to someone else, or whatever, or what have you. So it could literally be that person. Seeing a picture of that person, maybe a news flash, maybe their mugshot comes up on television or something like that. Trigger. Occupation, so having a certain job, having to serve others, customer service or something. Let's say you had a really traumatic experience. I'm actually gonna say, years ago people used to go postal, and that's basically, from my understanding, they worked at the post office, they got fired or terminated abruptly, and then they would come back and just like shoot everybody, or just shoot up the place, or really destroy the place, or what have you. So that was entitled going postal, and it could be an occupation like that, or what have you. So you may say, hey, I can work anywhere except for in the post office, simply because of the previous experience. Maybe you were there when somebody went postal, or whatever, what have you, and just being in that environment, everything could be triggers. Seeing mail trucks, seeing mail boxes, standing behind the counter, being in the back sorting mail, or whatever you were doing at the time, or anything that could put you in the mind or pull you back to that previous experience with somebody going postal, or somebody doing something at your job or at work, and you're like, I can't work here no more. And not only can I not work here anymore, I'm not going to work in this industry anymore, or what have you. Another example, level of authority. Like I said, it could be if you were a child and the person was your guardian, or had rulership over you, or ownership on some level, and now you don't have respect for authority figures, because although you're not that child, and they're not the adult or the guardian or the person that had rulership or what have you, or authority in some level over you. It's still the point that you have a level of control. You're my boss, so you tell me what to do, or what have you. A lot of times we see this in teenagers or children in general at school, where they don't have respect for authority figures, and typically it's because there's been some abuse, some neglect, or something with somebody that was in authority in their life. And it also can be in the spiritual arena. You could have had a pastor or a leader or what have you that was abusive or manipulative or controlling or what have you. And now ain't nobody gonna tell me what to do, or what have you. You could develop that mindset as a direct result of that. So their other external triggers could be time of day. And I speak about this in almost like a series that I did, episodes 49 through 42. I admonish you to go back and take a look at those. So they are entitled, What Brought Me to Christian Counseling? And in that, I chronicle 3 specific traumatic events that literally happened one month after another. One in February, one in December, one in January. And they were, major things. For example, literally, it's John 10:10, which says, the thief cometh not but to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I lived through those. I lived through an attempted robbery. I lived through an attempted murder where someone shot at my head. I lived, and the bullet fragment was found in my hair days later. The third one was destroy. And at 4 a.m., somebody was trying to kick down the apartment door. And at that point, like I said, that was the third of 3 consecutive strings of trauma. So at this point, mentally, I'm fighting for my sanity, because so much has happened in such little time. And in that moment, literally, the enemy was attempting to destroy my peace and my mind in and of itself. Like I said, my sanity. So that's just an example. And I said that to say that time of day became an issue for me. So when the attempted robbery happened, it was only 7:30, but it was nighttime because it was the fall season. It happened in November. So daylight saving time and all of that had already took place. So it was getting darker earlier. And For a long time, I had an issue with going out. I would not go out at night after that attempted robbery. I would not leave my apartment at night after that attempted robbery happened, because I was actually on my way back to my apartment. It happened right outside, on the steps that lead to my apartment. And I avoid it at all costs. Like, I would run all of my errands or whatever, what have you. If we were having something at church or anything after dark, I did not go. So that could be the time of day that something happened. Something could happen early in the morning hours. So the dawning of a new day could be traumatic for some person or some people. Afternoon, lunchtime, it could have been maybe an accident or something. Maybe you were on your way getting lunch or from getting lunch and trying to rush back to work or whatever, what have you, and an accident ensues. So that time of day, you may get antsy, or you may not want to drive or go anywhere or what have you as a result, because it's directly linked back to that time of day. Or like I said, it could be nighttime, for like my example. Objects, certain things. It could be maybe if you were assaulted with an object. Now you don't want to see that object. You don't want to be around it. You fear that you'll be assaulted with it again, or you feel that you may fear that it will hurt you in some way, or someone else may use it to, assault you again, or what have you. Colors, certain colors. And that makes me think of like the bull, the people that ride bulls and stuff, because the color red, the bull just amps when he sees color red. So that's just a natural example of how colors can trigger certain things. For some people, the color black. Let's say they went to a funeral that was really traumatic or whatever, or what have you. Maybe the person that passed away or transition was extremely close to them, or maybe there was just something that happened at the funeral. It could have even been a drive-by that happened during the funeral, or somebody came into the funeral shooting or whatever, what have you. So now seeing a lot of people grouped together dressed in black, or just black in general, reminds them of that day and that funeral. So that might be a color that they avoid. They throw it out of their wardrobe. They don't want to see it. They don't feel comfortable around it from that point on. Also, it could be sounds. It could be a pop, or the sound of something burning or crackling. If you've ever been in a house fire or something, the sound of fire and things burning and stuff like that may be a trigger for you. Physical touch. If somebody touches your shoulder or something, and it may be gentle, or it may just be unexpected, you may jump or what have you, because if you've ever been grabbed by your shoulders, or any domestic violence or any physical assault of some type, then that might be a trigger for you. It could even be like approaching you from behind. Any touch from behind that you're not expecting could be a trigger for you if you've had a traumatic event that's linked to that sort of touch. Being startled, once again, growing up, people used to love to scare you and like jump out and say boo, or turn off all the lights and do little crazy stuff like that, or what have you. So that could startle you, especially, let's say, if you're watching scary movies and you have to go to the bathroom or something. So you go to the bathroom, let's say you're watching television with somebody, and this didn't happen to me, but this is kind of vivid or what have you. Just a thought. So they are not seated where they were when you went to the bathroom. So you go looking for them, or maybe you sit down and try to continue watching the movie and get your mind off of things or whatever, what have you. And they jump out and say boo, or do something, throw something, or put something over your head, or put something on your feet that feels, funny or whatever, what have you. So you feel like somebody's trying to grab you or what have you. So that's just an example of being startled on purpose, usually. Bullying, or have you ever startled somebody and you see their eyes and you know that, like, wow, like they went from 0 to 100 real quick, like they're terrified. They might even be in shock and like not moving or anything at that point, and you didn't even mean to startle them, but they were coming around the corner and you were too, and both of you were quiet and you didn't know, and y'all maybe almost bumped into each other or something. But just startle, and some people's startle reflex is on, like I said, 100, because of a previous fright, scare, fear, or something like that. Bullying is another external trigger. Or abuse. It could be any kind of abuse: sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, anything, any level of abuse can be a trigger, because once you've experienced that, then little things can actually pull you back into that experience again over time or suddenly. Witnessing trauma, which is one that I don't think a lot of people talk about. But when you see certain things, like it said, as the ways that we can, or things we can be triggered by what we see, you can't unsee what you saw. And like we can go back to the previous example of the neighbor that got shot in our parking lot at our apartment complex. Like that is a major trigger just because she witnessed his body, lifeless body lying there, then that's a trauma. And it's not that it actually happened to her, but she saw, or she might have heard the entire thing, or whatever, what have you. So that's a trigger for her, or for anybody, that saw, heard, or experienced it on any level. And they call this secondary trauma. A lot of therapists, people that work in mental health, that hear the worst stories, that hear about abuse and neglect and sex trafficking and people being sexually assaulted and things of that, children being hurt and maimed in incestuous relationships, just all of this drama and trauma. Honestly, you're hearing it hour after hour after hour after hour coming from different people, what have you. Even people in law enforcement, like detectives and stuff like that, the people that work on cold case files and police officers and first responders. I mean, you see so much, so you can become secondarily traumatized. It didn't happen to you, but because you saw it, there's a trauma, there's a trigger, there's something that resonates, or there's been a deposit made or a residue left after the trauma has transpired. Unexpected changes in life that are beyond your control. And that example can go back to the going postal. You get fired, you get terminated, you weren't expecting it, or what have you. And now you fear that you can't pay your rent, you can't feed your children, you can't pay your car note. You don't know how you're going to survive. That's unexpected. So that could be extremely traumatizing for you, to try to figure out what to do next. How am I gonna, how are we gonna live, or what have you. Now, some of the responses. Now, there are two things you can do. You can react or you can respond to any situation. You have a decision to make, right? Now, with the triggers, it's usually an automatic reaction, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, whether it's natural or unnatural, simply because there's something inside of that person, almost like I said, like a bullet in the chamber of a gun. You pull that trigger, and if the bullet is viable and it works, it's going to shoot, it's going to fire, right? If there's nothing, keeping it from firing, no misfire, like I said, if it's not a blank or whatever, what have you, it's going to fire. It's just cause and effect, supply and demand, or what have you. So there are 4 of these. And I actually did a previous episode entitled opportunity versus opposition, or opposition versus opportunity. It's all about perception and how you choose to look at the situation. So in that one, I talked about fight, flight, or freeze. This one actually adds another one, which is submit. So you might be thinking, what does it mean to fight? Okay, so this is considered hyperactivity. Like you getting into it. You're putting all your body parts into it, everything. It could even be limited to verbal aggression or whatever. You're going to fight. You're not going to let somebody just say anything they want to you. You're not a doormat. You're not going to be walked on or whatever, or what have you. And just opposition of some sort. So it's like bumping of heads or what have you. Limit testing, physical aggression. Once again, that goes with that, the opposite, not the opposite, but a similar aggression to verbal aggression. That's just what you say. But physical aggression is like you're really being physical with it. You're using your body parts. It's like, pushing past somebody or pushing somebody with your shoulder or your body weight or whatever, or literally pushing them with force with your hands, punching somebody. Those are examples of physical aggression. And things of that nature. So we're going to switch over to flight. What does it mean to take flight when it comes to responding to a trauma or a trauma trigger? Now, withdrawal. So you're just withdrawing. You're not, you're oblivious to what's going on, or at least pretending to be. So you're withdrawing. You're escaping. You're running away, literally or figuratively. Self-isolation and avoidance. And some people who are not really physical type people, or that's not their first reaction to be physical, to fight and all of those things, then they may be the type that avoid or that want to take flight. They don't want none of that smoke. They don't want them issues. They're not about that life or whatever or what have you. So they're going to take flight. I'm going to avoid it at all costs. If I have to not ignore this person, but avoid this person, avoid going this way, avoid being in their presence or whatever or what have you, then that's what I would do. Like it said, self-isolation. I will isolate myself, like put myself in time out or take myself out of all the fun and the group of everybody, and I'll just be by myself. The third one is freeze. So freeze literally means stilling. And that reminds me of the scripture that says, be still and see the salvation of the Lord, or stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. So just getting still. Like when you freeze water, water moves before you freeze it. But once you freeze it, it's still. It's a cube. It's solid. It's not moving. It's no longer liquid. So stilling. Another term for freeze is watchfulness, as well as looking dazed. You can tell somebody that's in shock by their body. Like I said, their posture. They may not move. Maybe only their eyes move. Maybe their eyes don't even move. They're just like stuck in that situation or in that moment of time. Daydreaming is also a way of freezing or freezing, stilling, being watchful, what have you. Forgetfulness. So you're not going to remember. And that could be purposeful, or that could intentional or unintentional. Shutting down emotionally. So for example, let's say you're having a difficult conversation with someone and you notice that they're no longer reacting or responding. They're no longer fully engaged. They're not actively listening. It's almost like you're drawing a blank. They've emotionally checked out. They've emotionally shut down. They're not saying, yes, I hear you, I understand. They're not paraphrasing or summarizing. They're not giving you any feedback at this point because they've shut down. Or sometimes with teens or young or kids, sometimes they'll just become aggressive and they're not going to say anything. They're not going to say anything. So they're being oppositional in a way. And last is the fourth one is to submit. And this means just giving in too easily, though, is what they put, too easily. And sometimes people just say, okay, you're right, simply because they don't want to argue anymore, or they don't want to argue in the first place, or they just want to resolve it and move on to the next thing. They may know and understand that you're not right, but they understand if I tell them they're right, they understand that you're a right fighter. So if I say you're right, then we can move on. There's no fight. There's no argument. There's no power struggle, no opposition, right? Denying personal needs, such as hunger. So you might get into an argument or something about where to go to eat or whatever, and they might just say, I'm not hungry anymore. We're good. Just take me home, or, I find something at home or whatever, what have you. Now they're probably still hungry or what have you, and really would like and prefer to go to wherever you guys want to go or need to go, but they're just going to submit and just say, okay, never mind. I'm not hungry anymore. So that solves that problem, basically, is what they're saying without literally saying it. And aligning with more powerful peers. So that's pretty much groupthink. You want to do what the group wants to do because you're not bold enough to stand on your own. You're not courageous enough to say, no, I really want to go here, and I think that we should go here, or assert yourself on that level in that manner. So you'll just go with what the group says because it's more of them than you, and you might feel like they have more clout, they have more pull than you, more leverage. So, and it also says you're not only aligning with the more powerful peers, but it says even when those peers are mean to you. That's what do they call it? I don't want to say the cock boy. They say something boy. But it's, and I guess you could be the cock girl or whatever, what have you. But basically, it's the person that they keep you around, but you're not really a part of the group. They keep you around so they can pick on you. They might keep you around because you have money or because you have a car or what have you. But you're not really a part of the group. You are just serving them in some way or some capacity. You have something that they don't have. So they keep you around. You could be popular, or you could know a lot of people, or you could know, how to get discounts or how to get into places or whatever, what have you, because you have connections or a network that they don't have. So they need you for those purposes. But if you erase that need, you wouldn't be around them, and they don't treat you like an equal. You see that a lot in groups and cliques and stuff like that, or what have you. All right, so now we're going to move on to common triggers. Okay, so there are 7 of them. 7 of them. So one is unpredictability or sudden change. So this could be, like I said, a common trigger. Some people have to be in control. They're planners, and I'm a planner, so I get it. They're planners. They have to know that this, and this is going to happen. They have to be able to check things off their to-do list or what have you. If there's a change in it, it's almost like if somebody's a wedding planner and something goes wrong and they just like lose it because they're like, no, this is the way, I double checked. This is supposed to be here. It's supposed to be on this way. This is what they told me, whatever, what have you. And they're freaking out because they're like, things are not going according to plan. Some people, some terms for them are control freaks. Like they have to be in control. If they're not in control, then it's a major catastrophe or a crisis on their behalf or in their opinion. Now, this is the next one, loss of control. Once again, if you have to be in control and you're not, it's not good for you. Like you really, it doesn't feel good. You're not able to adjust or adapt or whatever, what have you. That puts me in mind of the movie by Tyler Perry, Daddy's Little Girls, where Gabrielle Union, the character's name was Julia. She was, Monty was her driver, and she was a rich lawyer or what have you, or a well-off lawyer, wealthy, I would say. And he had an emergency, and he needed to go to the hospital. So instead of driving her home or to her destination, which was his job, but he got a call about, his daughters and whatever, what have you. There was a fire at the house, and the daughters were at the hospital, so he needed to go there. And he was working a second job and whatever, what have you. That was his second job, so he needed childcare. Long story short, instead of taking her home, he got that call, and he was like, I'll be right there, because it was about his children. So he do a U-turn, and he takes her to the hospital, and then he leaves because he's concerned. He goes inside and he's trying to figure out what's going on or what have you. So he literally leaves her in the car, and she's like, no, Julia, you're in control here. And she kept on thinking of ways to confront him. It was sounding really, really lame. But anyway, it's because she's a control freak. And the fact that she was not in control, she did not know how to handle it. She did not know how to approach it. She didn't know how to adjust or any of those things. So feelings of vulnerability or rejection. So this could happen a lot in relationships, because in a relationship, you have to be vulnerable. You have to kind of put yourself out there or what have you, which if you're open, you may be open for heartbreak or heartache or what have you. Now, you may be open for the right thing, and everything may go well and go smoothly. But when you're vulnerable, you don't really know which way it's going to go, and you don't have control or power over how the other person feels, acts, or responds. So vulnerable position, which the rejection would be if things don't go according to plan, if they don't go well, if the person doesn't feel the same way as you do, or their feelings aren't as strong or whatever, or what have you. Other common triggers, confrontation. Just somebody addressing or speaking aggressively, or somebody approaching you or whatever, what have you, could be a trigger. And now you're ready to fight because your defense mechanism is up, because you coming for me, then you better pack a lunch, because it's gonna take about all day, because we about to throw down or what have you. So confrontation can be a trigger. Authority can be a trigger. Like I said, the previous example, if something happened to you when you were smaller or younger or previously or what have you, and the person that did whatever it was to you was in authority or had an authoritative position over you, or just a dominating or domineering spirit or personality, and you're more passive. So authority could be an issue. Limit setting could be a trigger. Having to set limits or not knowing how to set limits could be a trigger. Also, sensory overload. So it could be, as they said, the ways that we can experience trauma is by hearing, smelling, or whatever. If you've ever watched a movie, let me see. So if you've ever watched the movie, darn it, what is it with Marlon Wayans, where he's like a college student? Is it called Sixth Sense? Anyway, he's a college student and he's taking this experimental drug. And what happens is the drug heightens his sensation or whatever. It almost kind of makes him, if you will, like a superhero or whatever. He can see extremely far. He can hear very well. It just heightens all of his senses. But he experienced something in one of the scenes. It's called senseless. Thank you, Lord. It's called senseless. So he experienced something where he had everything was heightened, like he was hearing and seeing to the point where he was hearing so loud that he had to close his eyes to kind of take some of the extra stimulus away because it was just too much. It was sensory overload. And sometimes when people get overwhelmed and overloaded, they snap. It's a trigger. Like they're not themselves for a moment or until they get things back together. So that's another example. Number 6 is loneliness. So being lonely could be a trigger for someone. That may be why some people jump from one relationship to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, simply because they fear being alone, or them being alone may take them back to a place of depression or what have you, because the last time they were alone or felt lonely, maybe they were suicidal. Maybe it was something going on in their life. Maybe they had self-isolated, as we said in one of the previous terms, and they weren't in a good place as a result of that. So they feel like, okay, as long as I'm not alone, or as long as I don't feel alone, or as long as I have people around me, then I won't go to that place anymore. I won't be suicidal or homicidal or whatever or what have you. So that's just an example of what loneliness could look like played out in real life. And the last one, situations perceived as unfair or unjust. And this actually can turn into a soul wound. Injustice is one way that a soul wound can be inflicted. Rejection, as we talked about previously, also is another way that soul wound can be inflicted. So basically, in school, or no, let's say in the home, let's say your parents have a favorite child, or you perceive that they have a favorite child, and you feel like they're unfair to you because you're not the favorite child, or the favorite child, or the oldest, or the youngest. You're in the middle. I did a series on that about the middle child syndrome or what have you. So I advise you to go back and look at that, especially if you're a middle child. Some things may resonate with you, even if you're not a middle child, because we go over all of the birth orders and some of the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages of being in either order. So it's just perceived as that's not fair. You're treating them better than me. They got to do this, so why don't I get to do this, or whatever, or what have you. Now, we are going to move on to things that can trigger trauma. And some of this is repetitive, so I may not go or delve into it too deeply. And I also may not give as many examples because we're getting up there with the time. All right, so sounds are trauma triggers, or can be. People, thoughts, places, media, situations. Okay, so the majority of these we have gone through, but I'm just going to speak the example, or I kind of defined each of this to ensure that we're on the same page and we have the same thought pattern. So as it pertains to sound, it's just hearing certain sounds or music associated or having certain feelings. All right, so this is new because they associated music. You know, music takes you, well, number one, all music carries a spirit. And it can be a good spirit or a bad spirit. Some music can make you depressed and feel half suicidal because of your current situation, or because of what the lyrics say, or what have you. Some can make you upbeat, can make you rowdy, can make you want to fight. Like I think about rock and roll music or something, or what have you. I think about R&B or rhythm and blues. You know, I'm going down because you ain't around and stuff like that. Those kind of, my whole world's upside down. You know, just certain. Although it's a nice song and all, but when you look at the lyrics, you know, you're going down. You're saying that you're going down. So guess where you're going? down as a direct result of saying or singing that. But anyway, so music, it's important to know and note that. And it can take you back to that place. So for example, let's say you were a teenager in high school and something was your favorite song or whatever, what have you, something traumatic happened or something, even something good happened. And that song just takes you back. You'll know it. Like it could be a family reunion. You play the electric slide or you play something that's old, some old school or what have you. The older people, might start snapping or start talking about, we don't know nothing about music. Our music ain't real music. Now that's real music. It got substance and it's got lyrics, and the lyrics meant something, and you could hear what the people were saying and you could understand and it could relate to life and all of this and all that. So just examples. Now, people seeing someone who is related to or has the physical trait, and we talked about that previously. They could just have the body shape, or they could have the personality. Or, for example, let's see an ex-husband. You don't see him, but you might see his mom, or you might see his sibling, or somebody. But when seeing that person is a direct line or link back to the other person, or what have you. Although it's not them, they're related to them, so it puts you in the mind of that person. Because you might have met that person through the other person. You might have met the mom through the husband, or whatever, your ex-husband, or what have you. Thoughts can be memories, and they can make your brain bring you back, whether willingly or unwillingly. And when I think about this, I think of flashbacks, because literally flashbacks make you think or make you feel, or like put on the big screen what happened. It's like playing a film, something that literally happened, and it's taking you back to what happened, where you're seeing it, you could be experiencing it, you're hearing it, or what have you. So it does have a pulling effect. And like it said here, unwillingly, you could be wanting to have the best day in the world, yet your mind or your thoughts flashing or are going in different directions or different places that you never intended and don't even want them to go. Smells, strongly tied to memories. Certain scents can trigger. It could be, and this made me think of the movie Life, where, what was his name? It was Ray Gibson and Claude Banks. Okay, so Martin Lawrence was Claude Banks. Ray Gibson was Eddie Murphy. Claude Banks he smelled a pie that a Caucasian older white lady was baking pies, and he was in prison or whatever, what have you, on the prison camp. And the lady put out the fresh pies on the windowsill to let them cool or what have you, because she had just taken them out of the oven. So previously he had they were African American men. They went into a restaurant and basically they said, these are whites only pies. So when he smelled them pies and he saw that white woman put it out, he said out loud, whites only pies. So he ran to get some of that pie, because he wasn't going to be whites only pies today. He was going to get some of that with his African American self. So that just put me in it, because it was the smell that triggered that memory and triggered him to go running, trying to get to the pie. And he got it and everything like that. And that reminds me that I did a recent blog on the LOL website that I share with my two spiritual sisters. The first L is for Letitia, the other Letitia with a capital T. The O is for Onisha, and the other L is for me, Letitia, with a lowercase t. So it can be found on LOL-ascroll.com, and it is entitled Trauma Triggers. So definitely, if you want to read, and I actually go into a story that happened in high school where I found out that I had trauma, and it was triggered to the point where I got sent to the office and all of that. We're about to get into a physical altercation and all of that. As a result, and I give other stories, and I talk a little more about the steal, kill, and destroy, when I lived that, literally. So I admonish you to go check it out, LOL-ascroll.com, and it's Trauma Triggers. So it's actually up this week, because we just posted it within the last 48 hours. So check that out and leave a comment or whatever, what have you. And the next thing is places. So where trauma took place as well as a similar place. So if it happened in a church, all churches could be off limits or be triggering for you. The example of the person trying to kick the door in at 4 a.m., actually the apartment became a trigger, or at least outside the door. So it was, I guess it was rainy or something, because there was like mud and boot prints all over the front of my door where he was literally trying to kick it in. And I avoided, like it said, fight, flight, freeze, or submit. I took flight for a month or more. I would not clean the mud off of the door. So it was a trigger for me. So I needed to avoid it in order to just keep going and to not have to think about it and to, continue with life as usual. But I might have even been in Christian counseling at that point. But at some point I made a conscious decision. Today, I'm erasing this. Today, I'm going to clean off the front of the door. And by cleaning off the front of the door, I had to confront what happened. I had to confront, how did those boot prints and mud footprints get on my front door? So that was a part of my healing process, that I had to make a conscious quality decision to do that. So place, and that was right outside my apartment. So I would just get out my car, come in, unlock the door, come in and close the door. I wouldn't look at it. I wouldn't, I was completely avoiding it. That place as best I could. So media, and I thought this was interesting, that media can trigger. So it says news report, movie, or TV series can show a similar scene to something that actually happened to you in real life. And that makes sense. And when you just think about it in general, I even spoke or touched on in the blog how we all, not only have we all experienced trauma, a lot of us have experienced trauma together. Think of September the 11th. Think about this recent pandemic. Some people would say the plandemic, but think about this recent COVID-19 pandemic. Think of how it changed our thoughts and the way we approach people. And when you hear somebody coughing, you automatically assume that they're sick, and no allergies, no cold. Every cough was COVID. You know what I'm saying? Not even smiling at people or greeting people. Everybody just trying to get in the grocery store, get their stuff and get on out. Like, it really changed things. And now that they're saying it's a resurgence or that it's back on the scene or what have you, that could be a trigger for some people. I know some people on Facebook were saying it's back and basically saying I'm barricading myself in, I'm not coming out, blah, 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 woo, woo, skippy. So trigger. Feelings. So feelings or emotions. And we talked about what emotions are, and feelings is an example being sad. An emotion is like joy. They're similar but different. You can feel them both at the same time or simultaneously. An emotion of being in pain or suffering or sorrow, something like that. Now, situations can be triggers because they would be similar to or remind you of the trauma. So it could be something like being homeless. That's a traumatic, experience in and of itself. But let's say you find yourself homeless more than once. And I actually have that testimony. Now it wasn't for an extended period of time, but homeless is homeless. You don't have a home, you don't have your own, or whatever, what have you. So being in that situation or a similar situation can be traumatizing or trigger some trauma or what have you. So we're going to move to causes of trauma and then how to cope. And we're going to see what the word says about it, or what Abba gave me via his word. And we're going to call it a day. All right. So what causes a trauma? And basically the word or the term cause is defined as a person or thing that gives rise to an action, phenomenon, or condition. So basically this happens and then you react or respond or whatever. Because that happened, this happened for me. Because you did that, it's like cause and effect. Because you did that I'm going to do this. And sometimes it's automatic. Like I said, when it's a trigger, it's pulled, boom, it's an automatic reaction. So They gave the examples of some causes. I feel uncared for when, and it's like dots. So you fill that part in or whatever, what have you. And you can go ahead and do that, for yourself or what, or mentally, or write it down. I feel uncared for. So that could be a trigger for somebody, especially someone who has experienced childhood neglect, or what have you. Then when they feel like, nobody cares or nobody's caring for me, nobody's meeting my needs, that could take them back there to that childhood trauma, if and when they haven't been healed from it or done the work, so to speak. I feel betrayed. So when do you feel betrayed? What makes you feel betrayed? What makes you know that you are being betrayed, have been betrayed, or what have you? Or maybe will be betrayed. I feel manipulated. When do you feel manipulated? When do you know that you've been manipulated? Is it before, during, or after the manipulation? I feel disrespected. What happens for you when you feel disrespected? Years ago, oh my goodness, there was an issue with disrespecting people, okay? They would jump in your face. I want my respect. You gonna respect me. It's like, bruh, all right. So, what does it look like for you when you feel disrespected? And what place does that take you? Is it a traumatic place? What is the root of that? What's the root system? All right. I feel unimportant. So if you feel unimportant, if you feel left out, whether it's actually, authentic or it's really happening or not, your perception is your reality. So if you perceive that you are unimportant, or that you're being left out, or that, you're being taken advantage of, or whatever, what have you, then that could be a trigger. Another trigger could be, I feel unwelcomed. If you feel unwelcomed, if you've ever literally really been unwelcome, and then you get that sense, like I said, even if it's not the truth, you may assume that you're not welcome, or that nobody spoke to you, or they didn't greet you, or whatever, what have you. They could have just been busy. They maybe didn't see you. Something else was on their mind, something more pressing. Maybe they needed to put something down, and then they were going to come back and speak, or whatever, what have you. But just when or if you feel unwelcome, what happens for you? What is your reaction, your automatic reaction? What does that trigger for you? I feel unheard. When you don't feel like people are listening, when you don't feel like your opinion or your suggestion is being counted, what is your reaction? What does that trigger for you, if anything? I feel left out. If you feel left out, like I said, you feel like they're not including you, or whatever, or they didn't invite you, whatever, what have you. What happens for you? What does that trigger for you, if anything? I feel blamed. So if you feel like somebody's blaming you, pointing the finger at you, saying you, if you didn't do this, then this wouldn't have happened, or whatever, what have you. What does that trigger for you? And where does that come from? What is the root to that? Where did that start? Where's the origin? Where did it stem from? I feel judged. So if and when you feel judged, does that trigger something? And this could be so very common in the church. People don't like to feel judged. Okay, people don't like to be judged. People don't like to feel judged. Judge ye not, then that you not be judged, because with the same measure that you judge, you're gonna meet that measure, or what have you. Scripture says. So people don't like to be judged. Even Tupac said, only God can judge me, or what have you. So. Feeling judged, what does that do for you? What does that do in you? What does that produce or pull up and out of you? So, and the last one is feeling not good enough. Now, that doesn't mean that it's accurate. Like I said, perception is reality at that given set point time. So, not feeling good enough. Maybe you didn't make the cut. Maybe the audition didn't go so well. So what happens for you, in you, and with you when you don't feel good enough, or you perceive that you are not good enough. Now, how do we cope with these things? Or these triggers, excuse me. So what does it mean to cope, first and foremost? Cope is defined as of a person, so it's relating to people, human beings, dealing effectively with something difficult. So something difficult is on your plate, in your way, in your life. How do you deal with these things? Well, I've come up with, or my research brought about 6 things, 6 ways to cope with triggers, trauma triggers specifically. Practice relaxation techniques. Sometimes that's deep breathing, inhaling and exhaling on purpose. What else could sitting and listening to fountains. It could be journaling. It could be cooking. For some people, gardening. It could be listening to poetry or listening to scripture, listening to a sermon, listening to instrumental music. It could be taking a candlelight bubble bath with instrumental music or whatever, what have you. It could just be taking me time. Just time to relax, time to woosah, time to breathe, time to do something that you would like to do. So relaxation techniques, those are just some, but they vary from person to person. So something that's relaxing to me, taking a nap, laying down, whatever, what have you. So something that might be relaxing to me may not necessarily be relaxing to you. It might be relaxing for me to sing. Some people, relaxation embodies being quiet, or a soft, calm, tranquil, peaceful environment. So singing may not be or sound soft, peaceful, or tranquil. So it just varies. The second one is become aware of your triggers. So we need to know, and sometimes, realistically speaking, you don't know it's a trigger until it's pulled. Okay, so once you know that it is a trigger, then you can become aware. But sometimes you're in shock and awe yourself, like, man, I cannot believe I did that. I cannot believe I said that. I don't know why I went from 0 to 100 in 5.2 seconds. Like, I just don't understand. Like, I don't even act like that. I don't even talk like that. That's just not my personality, or whatever, what have you. And number 3 is anticipate and plan a coping strategy for triggers. So for example, in the work that I do, I'm kind of like a one-on-one. So I have, an individual that I work with. Now I have a sound machine in my Jeep, and it has different sounds, like the cricket sounds like that you hear at night. It has water and waves. It has sounds of rain. It has probably about 5 or 6 different sounds or what have you. But that is a way to anticipate or plan for coping strategies. So for example, if the individual that I work with is upset, overloaded in their senses, if they're hot, which makes them irritable and frustrated or angry or what have you, I have that. So for example, I'm anticipating it because we could get in the car, turn on it. Let's say they're hot. We could turn on the air conditioning to help to get them cooled off. And then we could listen to water, which is very relaxing, or what have you. Let's say they're upset, they're frustrated, they're agitated. That may or may not work. It's worth a try, But the fact that I have something on hand that can be utilized for just in case, it's almost like a first aid kit in case of emergency, or what have you, or in case you need it. That's one way of anticipating. You could maybe have a journal or a diary or a coloring book or a crossword puzzle or something in your car or in your possession. Some people put them in the bathroom, whatever, what have you. Some people like being on the throne for extended periods of time. But other people don't. So just having something that can be utilized when and if needed. It's almost like the fire extinguisher, in case of emergency, break glass, you have it just in case you need it. So that's anticipating and you having a plan to address it to help you to cope. Number 4, call someone if you're feeling triggered. Now, this can be a good or a bad thing because, what makes it imbalanced or not so positive is when you're dependent on that person. So every time you're triggered now, and unless this is your counselor, your therapist, or whatever, what have you, they're getting paid for this. So, they're expecting it. or whatever, or what have you. They're expecting crisis to come, and they're expecting to have to address those crises. But if it's like a friend or, or what have you, you just want to balance that because you don't want to burn people out, and you don't want to become dependent or codependent on someone. Like every time I'm triggered, I've got to call this person, because what happens when they're unavailable? Or what happens if they're like, look, I'm going through what I'm going through myself. I really can't shoulder anybody else's emotions, feelings, triggers right now. I'm struggling. You know what I'm saying? So it's just something to think about. Like I said, you want to balance that because you don't want to be dependent or codependent on this person. What if they don't pick up and you're triggered? What are you going to do? That's where you have to have coping skills. You have to have a plan and anticipate this in case, like I said, of emergency, in case it happens, in case they're unavailable or what have you. Now, number 5 is keep a journal. And we already talked about that or touched on that. It's important because sometimes you can identify. They talked about become aware of your triggers. Sometimes you can become aware of your triggers if you start writing things down, because as you go back and read your journal, you might figure out that, hey, I'm just not a morning person. Like I'm triggered by everything and everyone in the morning because I really don't want to be up. So I'm irritable and I'm just not myself, or whatever, what have you. Or it could be, like we said previously, the time of day. Maybe a trauma happened in the morning and you're not really connecting the dots, but you are seeing a pattern that I don't do well in the mornings. Or it could be afternoon or evening or daybreak or whatever, what have you. But just keeping a journal can help you to track patterns. It could be that, every 3 days I feel this way, or every time lunch comes around, or every Friday, or twice a week, once a month, or whatever, what have you. And there could be an anniversary or an event or a specific date that you find that centers around that time where you're just not doing well. And then that can help you to get to the root of what's going on. Once you identify, okay, so this is happening like on the 15th of every month or around that time. What has happened for me adversely around that time, around the middle of the month or what have you? Also, number 6 is exercise regularly. This goes with the relaxation techniques, because think about it. When you're lifting weights or when you're exercising, running, walking, what do they tell you to do? Deep breaths. They tell you to, engage your breathing, engage your core. Make sure you're doing your breathing while you're running or while you're walking. Do your breathing, take cleansing breaths or whatever they say. So that is it for how to cope. Now, this is what, because I was like, Dad, what kind of scripture am I going to, talk about? What are we going to do here? Because, trauma, or the term trauma, is not in the Bible, or it's at least not in the version that I read, which is the King James Version. Typically, I read other ones, but, so I'm just like, what are we gonna, what direction are we gonna take? Where are we going with this? So once again, I'm gonna review with you the term trauma and its definition. So it says trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So this actually put me in the vein of the book and chapter of my first self-published book entitled Cast Down But Not Destroyed, and my second upcoming self-published book, which is going to be entitled Troubled Yet Not Distressed. Now, once again, trauma is a distressing or disturbing experience, right? So here we go. This comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and we're going to start with verse 8, and then we're going to skip around, but we're going to end at verse 18. So it reads as follows. Once again, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8, and we're going to do some jumping. So we are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. So not traumatized. We are perplexed, confused, don't know what to do, where to turn, but not in despair. Verse 9 says, persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Verse 15 says, "For all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might through the thanksgiving of many redound to the glory of God." So even right here, basically anything and everything that we go through is for God, Abba, Father, to get the glory. There's nothing that he can't get the glory out of. The word of God says that all things, all means all inclusive, none exclusive. All things work together for the good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. All things, the good, the bad, the good, the bad, the bitter, the sweet, the ugly, everything in between. It all works together. God doesn't throw the clay away. Nothing is too damaged, too cracked, too chipped, too far gone where he can't use it, because he's the potter. He'll put it back on the wheel and he'll make it over again. So it's for his glory, no matter what we go through. And here's the thing, we have to give him the glory though, because sometimes we want to take his glory or say, I did the work. You might have did the work, but who gave you the strength? Who gave you life? Who allowed you to do the work? Who allowed the research, the statistics, the science, the whatever, academics to be put together for you to know how to do the work? Who, created the person that walked with you on your journey while you did the work? So at the end of the day, all the glory still belongs to him, because he is Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. So he's the first and the last. Everything. He's the creator of everything that we see, will see, or ever have seen. Okay? So at the end of the day, he gets all the glory. And that's what he does it for. So verse 16 says, "For which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day." So it's not what it looks like. It's not what it feels like. It's not what the situation or circumstance tells us it is like or it should be like. It's the inner man that's being renewed. That's what people can't see. That's what people don't see. What's going on in your heart? What's going on inside of you? And a lot of times we can't see it either. We know it, we feel it, we sense it, we perceive it, but I can't literally tell you I know what my heart looks like. Do you know what I'm saying? Or the internal organs or internal workings of my body systems. Now, verse 17 says, "For our light affliction." Light is the opposite of heavy. Although it may seem heavy, it may feel heavy, it says light affliction. Now, most of us think affliction, shucks, that's heavy. We don't want no affliction. But I mean, let's just think about it. If you had to choose, would you choose a light affliction or a heavy affliction? So it says, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment." Moment. Isn't that long? It didn't say years. It didn't say decades, centuries, none of that. It said, but for a moment. So it doesn't last that long. So for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. It's all for him to get the glory. And it's saying here that the more you go through, the more he brings you through, the more he graces you to go through, the more exceeding eternal weight it carries. Right? Weight of glory. And the glory is his once again. So it's a heavier level. It's almost like the more you go through, the stronger your anointing gets in those areas. Why? Because you've walked through it, you've survived it, and you have a testimony. And that you overcame him, the enemy, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of your testimony. So it's also put me in the mind of the show. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Those who he has redeemed from the hand of the enemy. When you've been redeemed from the hand of the enemy, you have a testimony. You have, your anointing is greater simply because you've gone through the crushing. You've been on the threshing floor. You know what I'm saying? So the oil that comes out, the anointing is stronger. It's more potent simply because what you survived, what you've gone through, and how much more closer to God you are, how much more intimate you are with him, how he's seen you in so many different ways, shapes, and forms. He's seen you in sorrow. He's seen you depressed. He's seen you traumatized. He's seen you with fear and trembling. He's seen you delighting yourself in him. He's seen you all the different facets and all the different sides of you. And you've seen all the different facets and all the different sides of him. You know him as a comforter. You know him as a provider. You know him as a keeper. You know him as a very present help in the time of trouble. So we'll move forward. Verse 18 says, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. So that's where you walk by faith and not by sight, where you understand that it's like my mom said. My mom, Tawana, my biological mother, says, it's not what you see, it's what you don't see. So we shouldn't necessarily be focusing or get so caught up in the natural or what we can see with our eyes, the situation, the circumstance, that we turn our eyes on that and we begin to make that bigger, because what you stare at longest becomes stronger. So if you're looking at your situation, it's almost like Peter walking on the water. He took his eyes off the Lord, and he began to look at the winds, and he began to look at the waves and all the opposition and all the things that could come against him and the adverse things that could happen as a result. So it's important for us to look at the things that are not seen and not the things that are seen. Okay. And this is why it says, for the things which are seen, that we see with our natural eyes, are temporal or temporary. I mean, they're not going to last. They're not permanent. Okay. But the things which are not seen, which we do not see with our natural eyes, but we can and do and should desire to see with our spiritual eyes, are eternal. Those are permanent. Those are lasting. And it talked about that eternal weight of glory. So the amount of crowns the amount of jewels that you will have in your crown, based upon all of the things that you've gone through, how you've endured hardship as a good soldier. It's going to have an eternal weight. It's going to matter in the afterlife. It's going to matter when you get to heaven or whatever, or what have you. So I said all that to say that, and I even touch on it in the article, that literally trauma can change your mindset. It can change your belief system. It can change the way you perceive people, places, things, whatever, and whomever. And it's not a positive change, okay, or what have you. So basically, when I went through a training years ago, basically what trauma does is it allows you to see that traumatic incident every time that you are triggered, or every time. It could be you were walking down the street and somebody, it was a drive-by and you had to dive on the ground or whatever, what have you. Every time you're walking down the street, it doesn't even, and it'll get to the place where it's so all encompassing, where it becomes a prison. So maybe at first it was just that street that it literally happened on, but then the enemy will want to take up more room in your mind, right? Strongholds. And so now it's 6 streets that you can't walk down because you think, that it's going to happen. And it'll get to the place where you can't walk down any streets. Think of people who are afraid to leave the house. Something has happened and they feel like their house is their only safe haven or safe place. So they won't leave the house. They won't walk down the street. They won't do this. They won't do that. They have somebody to do it for them or whatever, what have you, because they refuse to leave the house. That's how the enemy would desire to have us. But whom the Son is set free is free indeed. So there is no trauma, no trigger, or anything that should have or power or dominion over us. It will not, it cannot, it shall not, unless or until we surrender our will to it. We submit to it. instead of submitting ourselves to God and submitting our requests and our petitions to him to heal us from these things, to make us over again, to help us to see as he sees, to help us to hear as he hears, to help us to feel as he feels, to help us to smell as he smells, to give everything to him. Mind, spirit, body, soul, everything. The word of God says for us to cast our cares on him because he cares for us. The things that we care about, the things that traumatize us, the flashbacks or whatever, what have you, they're neither here nor there to Abba, because he can wipe them away just like that. But the word of God says you have not because you ask not. So I pray and admonish you, beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you ask and pray, which is the same thing. Praying is just a conversation between you and God. Ask him to take it away. Ask him to reveal to you the root so you can deal with it at that root level. So once again, as I said in root system, if you just cut it off, it's going to grow back. That's why we get haircuts. That's why we have to cut grass, because the root is still in place. So I just want you to be encouraged today that trauma triggers don't have to have place in your life. Trauma triggers don't have to rule over you. They don't have to box you in. They don't have to take up real estate and space in your mind to the point where you can't think of anything else, to the point where they branch out into phobias. Now you're afraid of all cats and all dogs. You're afraid of going down the street. You're afraid of cars. You're afraid of guns. You're afraid of everything. Because we understand and know that the word of God says that God has not given us the spirit of fear. So if God didn't give it to us, then who gave it to us? There's only two in business. So I don't want nothing from the devil. I don't know about you. I can't speak for you. But I don't want anything from him. And even in the article on lol-scroll.com, the scripture is listed that talks about the ruler of this world comes, but he has nothing in me. So we should desire for God to clean us out, to purify us. Like David said, purge us with hyssop and make us clean, whiter than newly fallen snow. So that we don't have anything of his in us, because it's like a remote control. As long as you got that microchip and they got that remote, they can control things. And we should not want the enemy to control any part, any area of our lives. And we have been given the power and authority from Abba to prevent that from happening. Or if it has happened, or it is currently happening, we can stand for the defense of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we can come out of agreement and covenant with that thing. So I admonish you to seek the Lord as it pertains to your quality of life. Because once again, John 10:10 says the enemy comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Your quality of life can be greatly diminished when there is trauma, when you're reliving it, when you're flashing back, when you can't eat certain things because something traumatic happened. And now food was surrounding that. Too much food, not enough food, or whatever, what have you. And now you avoid eating that type of food, or you can't buy it from the store, or you can't even be around it. You can't even think or fathom it. You can't look at the container or whatever, what have you. So I just join you in prayer for the Lord to heal every trauma. Heal everything that's disturbing or distressing to you, because distress is the negative type of stress, and stress can kill. There are lots of stress related physical ailments and sicknesses and conditions. So I think that's all I have at this point. And I believe I've done what needed to be done. So I want you to remember that God and only God has the final say so about where you are now, about where you've been, and where you are going, because you are simply in the process of becoming who and what God created, ordained, destined, and designed, as well as purposed you to be for his kingdom and his glory. Until next time, miracles and blessings to you today and every day.